I stepped out of my motel room, keys clattering in my hands as I fumbled with the lock. It was a cool summer's night and the stars glittered above the lonely parking lot. A light breeze rustled my hair, bringing with it the smell of cooked steaks from a nearby barbecue. As I stepped towards my car, I heard the sound of a footstep from a nearby alley. I nearly jumped at the noise. "Hello?" I said nervously. No one answered. And just as I was about to make a dash for my car, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. A dark figure had suddenly appeared from around the corner. I felt a sharp blow. Stars danced across my vision, and the last thing I remember seeing was the ground rapidly approaching. When I at last opened my eyes, I awoke to total darkness. The ground vibrated gently beneath me. I tried to move, but found that I couldn't. I pulled hard and still did not budge. My arms and legs were bound tightly behind my back. I tried to scream, but my mouth was gagged as well. I wriggled and felt my head bump against a wall. My feet kicked against another, and all that I could smell was just diesel and dust in the musty confines of that narrow space. With a twinge of terror, I realized that I was trapped in the trunk of a car. From the sound of the engine, I could make out the car that was on the highway as it purred at high speed. I could hear the soft swoosh of other cars passing on the right. I felt sick. My stomach lurched, and slowly my eyes began to moisten with tears. I remembered hearing people talk about 2 young women who had gone missing in the area in the last 2 months, and wondered if it wasn't the same person who now had me. The weight of reality came crashing down upon me all at once. I felt paralyzed with the realization of the danger I was in, my mind not even able to process the fate that awaited me when at last the car came to a stop. I felt my bonds. My hands were shackled tight with steel cuffs that didn't budge no matter how hard I tried to squeeze out. My ankles were tied firm. My fingers could just barely reach the knot and would slip each time I tried to tug on it with how tightly it was fastened. Tears streamed down my cheeks and pooled on the carpeted floor. I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. I cursed myself for not being more cautious, for wanting to go out tonight when I had known about the disappearances. My breathing became labored as not enough oxygen was able to get through the rag. Against my better judgment, I began to hyperventilate. I couldn't stop and worried that I just might pass out. And then I heard it. The sweet, almost violin-like sound of a police siren from about 20 meters back. At once, my breathing controlled itself. Hope fluttered inside my chest. I felt the car slow and listened to the crunching of gravel as it pulled over to the side of the road, and then it stopped. The purr of the engine died and all became still. I stared out into the darkness, straining my ears for even the slightest of noise. In the distance, I heard a car door slam shut, and then there was the crinkling footsteps of the officer on the gravel. I held my breath and waited until the officer was at the driver's side door. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" I heard the muted voice of the officer say. There came a muffled response from the driver, too quiet to hear. "Your right taillight's broken. I'm gonna need to see some ID and registration." Now was my chance. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could into the rag. It sounded a little more than a soft moan. "How long has it been out?" I heard the officer say. I screamed louder, moving around as I did. I lifted my heels as high as they would go and as hard as I could, kicked against the floor of the car. At last, I heard a response. "What was that?" said the officer. Silence followed. I could practically hear him listening. I made out no response from the driver. I repeated the routine, twisting my body until the tip of my shoes were just able to hit the lid of the trunk. I banged against it furiously, the hatch rattling with the vibrations. "Sir, is there something in your trunk?" the officer said. I could feel my heart lifting as I continued to kick vigorously at the latch. "I'm gonna need you to stay where you are," said the officer. And then I heard the footsteps of the policeman draw near. I could feel his presence on the other side of the lid. There was the soft scrape of his fingers along the metal as they moved towards the handle. And then I heard the driver's side door open. "Sir, I told you to stay inside your vehicle." I felt a horrible unease in my chest. Suddenly, the officer shouted, "Sir!" Oh. It was cut short by a loud bang as a gunshot rang throughout the night. I heard the body of the policeman slam against the trunk and then flop onto the ground. I tried not to make a sound. My mind rang with the noise of the gunshot. The officer's scream seemed to echo throughout the night, eventually fading into nothingness along with any sense of freedom that I might have briefly had. The driver's door slammed closed. The car was alive again in a second. Soon the engine rose to a roar as we picked up speed. Car horns became just blips of noise as we sped past, traveling now much faster than we had before. With a newfound sense of urgency, I tried desperately with my fingertips to pick at the knot. Each time they slipped. My nails chipped as I tried to pinch the tip of the rope. Eventually, I was able to wiggle a piece of it loose. But the knot still didn't weaken. I kicked at it, crying in frustration. My ankles were beginning to hurt from the rope digging into them, but still I squirmed. I felt the car slow and turn, and listened to the ground shift from the purr of asphalt to the rough rumbling of dirt road. The car moved just as quickly, flying over potholes. The suspension rattled. My body jumped with each bump. From off in the distance, there was the faint whine of police sirens. I prayed that they were following us, that they weren't on their way to the scene of the shooting and already knew which car to find. But the sirens soon faded into the night. I tugged at the knot, cursing as I tried to open up a space wide enough for my foot. I kicked off my shoes and with great strain tried to pull the knot up and over my heel. My foot felt like it was about to break with the strain, but eventually I got my heel through and breathed a sigh of relief as I was able to kick off the rope. There was a bump, and I heard the rumble of dirt road shift to the rustle of grass, swiping the underside of the car. We were off-road, perhaps in a field. My breathing hastened again. We were likely very close to our destination. For the first time that night, I heard the voice of the driver. He didn't seem to be talking to me, but to himself. It began as mumblings, but rose until I could make out his deep voice more distinctly. He was speaking in a language that I didn't recognize. There was rhythm to what he was saying, as though he were chanting the words. My blood curdled at the noise. I didn't need to hear it to know that he was mad, but the chanting still unnerved me. As though I were getting a glimpse into the deranged mind that now had me. The car rolled to a stop. I heard the man get out. He called out to someone, his voice echoing throughout the night, and I wondered if there were two of them. I refused to make a sound, afraid to draw his attention to the trunk of the car. There was still the sound of sirens, but they were a long ways out to be of any help. I heard the man call out again, and then the chanting resumed. There came the rustling of his footsteps, and I listened as they got near. He crept alongside the side of the car. I could hear the jingling of the keys. Something metallic tapped against the sides of the trunk as he moved along the length, and I wondered if it wasn't a dagger or the muzzle of his gun taunting me. I readied myself. At the first sign of the door opening, I would lash out with a kick. He would likely not have expected that I had freed my legs. It might be my only hope to catch him off guard. There were still the sounds of faraway police cars, and as I heard the keys dig into the lock, I began to realize that the sirens were getting closer. The man stopped, and with a breath of relief, I heard him retreat to the driver's side door. I nearly cried for joy as I heard the rustle of car tires in the grass, not from one police cruiser, but several, as the sirens rose to a scream. The man was fumbling with something up front. I heard the sounds of officers shouting, "Hands on your head, now!" There was a gunshot, followed by many more at once. One pierced a hole a few inches from my head. "I'm in here!" I cried throughout the rag, but the words were unintelligible. I kicked at the latch again and again, hoping that someone might notice. In the light that spilled from the bullet hole, I could now make out the trunk in its entirety. For the first time, I noticed that there were other things in here with me. I noticed a box of candles that had toppled over, and pages of text with what looked like ancient runes scrawled across them. In the corner, the lifeless sockets of a human skull watched me as I banged for help, grinning at my alarm. "Man down," I heard an officer say. "Sir, do you hear something?" said another. Sir, there's someone inside the car," said a third. I continued screaming at the top of my lungs until the rustling of grass from at least a half a dozen people was all that I could hear. "Hello? Hello, is someone in there? Stay calm, we'll get you out." There was the scraping of tools against the latch until there was a click and the lid swung open. I was blinded by the headlights from the squad cars. I squinted to see at least 3 silhouettes standing over me, and I nearly cried with joy. "Easy now," said one as they helped me out of the trunk. I was escorted towards the police cars, my hands still shackled behind my back. I could barely walk from the burns on my ankles and had to be carried by the 2 men. We were in a field, at the edge of a dark, evergreen forest. The body of the man lay by the driver's side door, 2 bloody holes in his chest. His face I couldn't see past the tall grass. In all the confusion of the officers shouting and the sirens blaring, I found myself looking over to the forest's edge. There, I could see a set of red eyes glaring back at me from between the trees. Whatever they belonged to had to be about 8 feet tall, and as my eyes adjusted, I could just make out the glimmer of 2 long white fangs before the police car door opened and I was placed inside. I heard a low grumble like distant thunder. And when I looked again, the creature was gone. No one but me had seemed to notice. Police would go on to find the bones of 2 humans in the area around that forest with signs of animal bites all over them. They believe that the killer brought them to this spot so that their bodies would be picked apart by a pack of wolves that might live in the surrounding woods. But I suspect that there is something more sinister than a wolf that man was taking me to visit that night, as much as I would rather not believe. Thanks so much for listening, guys. A quick shout out to my patrons: Kevin Kess, Sabiel Eclipse, 055555, Cormac Wells, Amara, Matthew Steiner, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, Mr. Sankofa, Michael Milburn, Kozak, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Eric Cifuentes, Andreas Anderson London, Lawrence Wallen, Geek Sanctuary, Melissa Perez, and this guy. That is someone's actual username. I love that. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. If there's anything you would like me to pray for, I would love to know how I can be praying for you. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video.